Namaskara, good evening, and welcome to BIC Streams. Bangalore International Center, or BIC for short, is an inclusive and neutral platform for informed conversation, intellectual dialogue, exchange of ideas, and the arts. Today's session, in collaboration with Spaceport SARABHAI, is Transforming India's Space Economy, Operationalizing Space Reforms. In June 2020, the Department of Space announced the launch of Indian National Space Promotion Authorization Center, IN-SPACe for short, to serve as a bridge between ISRO and the private sector to develop a commercially viable and vibrant space ecosystem in India. 17 months later, in September 2021, the Department of Space appointed an IN-SPACe board with the former MD of Mahindra and Mahindra, Pawan Goenka, as its chairman. In October 2021, the PM launched the Indian Space Association. The proposed IN-SPACe Directorates are yet to be established, as is the policy framework and accompanying legislation. This space policy panel, hosted by India's newly formed space think tank, Spaceport SARABHAI, will debate and discuss the policy and government flow through critical to operationalize the intended reforms needed to transform India into a developed space economy that can compete in the $420+ billion global space market. For a layperson like me, if India were to make a Spielberg, Ron Howard style sci-fi film or a space docudrama film, this may well be the panel that they may open with. We have with us Sanjaykumar, CEO of Geospatial World, Ranjana, Secretary General, Spaceport SARABHAI, and board member, International Institute of Space Law, Paris. K. Krishna, VP and CTO, Hughes India. Lakshmi Hassanabadi, VP and Head Missiles and Aerospace, Larsen & Toubro. The panel is moderated by Susmita Mohanty, Director General, Spaceport SARABHAI, member, World Economic Forum, Global Future Council for Space Technologies. And audiences, if you have any questions, please post your questions in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The full bios of the speakers will appear in the chat box, which is also at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And without further ado, I hand it over to Susmita.
Thank you, Lekha. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to host this panel. We have a very eminent panel. We have a very eminent panel with us this evening. India, as some of you in the audience are already aware, has a government space program that is 5 decades in the making. India, in fact, has one of the oldest space programs in the world. I say that because our experimental launches began in the early 60s. India could easily be ranked in the top 5, the top 6 spacefaring nations in the world, both in terms of technological capabilities and in terms of budget. But despite all this, we are barely a player in the international global space marketplace, which today is around $420 billion annually. The recently announced space reforms by the government of India are a welcome change to the largely government-run and government-controlled space program that we've had for several decades. So as Lekha pointed out, tonight's debate and discussion will look at the policy framework and the government follow-through that we need in order to operationalize the intended reforms that were announced by the Prime Minister nearly 2 years ago. I would like to now welcome our panelists, and I would like to request them to quickly introduce themselves and their respective organizations. Can we start with Sanjay? Sanjay?
Good evening and good morning to viewers from the West. This is Sanjaykumar. I'm the CEO of Geospatial World, which is a media and consulting firm. We are completing about 25 years this year. Well, I'm not an expert on space, I must say that, or geospatial. I'm a PhD dropout on geopolitics of technology transfer. And that's where I have a very close association with the politics of technology. And that's how I got into the space sector in the early 1990s. And I believe and very firmly believe in the fact that public policies is something which is very important for commercialization and democratization of any technology innovation and its socioeconomic impact analytics. So I have pursued my career as a sociologist and rural development expert, and then got into GIS to build up an environmental atlas in 1995-96. And further on, I realized that there is so much little information available about this technology that I took up the opportunity to develop a company in 1996, even on promoting this technology. So Geospatial World, which, as you know today, originated as GIS development in 1997, and we actually have a very global footprint. We have organized conferences in about 27 countries around the world, from Chile to Australia. We run magazine, which is Global Magazine, and we also do the market research and analytics. I'm also been honored by the United Nations as the Global Geospatial Industry Ambassador, and I co-founded the Association of Geospatial Industries in 2008 and World Geospatial Industry Council in 2018. And I serve on the board of United States National Geospatial Advisory Committee and Open Geospatial Consortium, Radiant Earth. So I've actually done a lot of work in the field of public policies and societal development goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you very much. Ranjana, over to you.
Oh, I think I need to.
You need to unmute, Ranjana.
Thank you, Shushmita, to all my co-panelists, and of course to all of our viewers in different parts of the world. Good morning or good night if they are keeping up late today. So I am a practicing lawyer, and I have been for several decades now. I've been a litigator, as most lawyers are, of an old vintage, because before 1990, there wasn't very much by the way of chamber practice, and because there was no foreign direct investment, etc. Be that as it may, I found myself in Montreal because my husband was posted there as ambassador to ICAO, and I ended up having taken a hiatus from the practice and went and enrolled at McGill, the Institute of Air and Space Law. And that's where the journey began into outer space, international law of outer space and international air law. That is what the Institute specializes in. And as it happened, my mentor, my professor, was Dr. Ram Jhaku. And he said to me that, you know, Ranjana, space is the next big thing for our country. And as he says, ki dil to mera Hindustani hai, even if I'm a Canadian citizen. So he said, now you have to do your dissertation on regulating satellite communications in India. And this is what you need to do, because not many people have actually come and done studied these laws per se. And so that's where it started. And I have been back in India several years. I'm a partner in Dua Associates in New Delhi, which is a full service law firm. And happily, my law firm indulges my passion for space law and deep engagements thereof. I specialize in policy and in the law, I mean, in the drafting of law, if you like. And also because I'm a practicing lawyer, I am advising companies, especially startups, who want to get into this sector and take them through the journey and through the various applicable policies. Of course, we don't have a regulation per se, but the policies. And hopefully now, we will see a change in the manner in which our National Space Administrator, the Department of Space, will take forward, just to quote Dr. Somnath, space as an inclusive enterprise. And if indeed that be true, and we are connecting that to the announcement that Prime Minister made in June of 2020, then we will have to see some distinct foreign forward movement beyond draft space policies. The only one that I feel has some substance, but again, as we were talking, the panelists, I was telling them that there are so many terms and phrases that we tend to, for some reason, paraphrase it, because that is how we refer to. But when you're writing a policy, it must be consistent with ultimately the law, which is what you're going to use. So you have to depend on your international treaties and the terms they use, because a specific meaning is attributed to each of these. And I do sincerely hope that whoever is going to be involved with finalizing the draft does indeed pay very close attention to these matters. I hope that I understand that the NGP, which is the guidelines, procedures, and the policy which was approved by the Union Cabinet in 2000. You remember back in the day that when satellite communications were introduced in India, the Cabinet then had approved the policy framework for implementation. And in order for that to be implemented on ground by ISRO, so therefore Department of Space, they had issued the NGP. And so 2000. Now that still remains on book and very much applicable. It has been suggested by earlier that NGP 2000 has not been very successful. Well, I don't know in what context, but yes, when we consider that of the 3 options that Cabinet approved for providing transponder capacity to our commercial communication and broadcasting company, which was on the INSAT, which was by allowing private satellite systems to be established, and by, in the interim, using leased transponding capacity on foreign satellites. So, well, 2 of them, 2 of those methods, which is INSAT and leased capacity, carries on even now. It subsists as on now. What has not happened, and we hope that it will happen, is for India to finally allow a private sector to enter into space activities. We'll remember that Prime Minister's announcement said all aspects of space activities. So now all aspects to me as a lawyer involve space segment and ground segment. So I am certainly looking forward to something further on this subject. And as Dr. Somnath said, that it is very much on the table, the NGP 2000. That provides you, that in fact provides all the details about authorization, about operating license, how the application will be looked at, etc. So it's in that context that I'm curious to understand that when you have draft policies which say that IN-SPACe will authorize everything in space, I don't really know what that means. I mean, one would like a little further substance on that articulation. But thank you. Let's go ahead. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ranjana. So for those of you who are not familiar with IN-SPACe, it's a nodal agency that was introduced by the DOS, the Department of Space, 2 years ago as a bridge, as an interface between ISRO and the private industry. And with that, I'll hand it over to Krishna. Krishna, could you please introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, a very good morning and good evening to all the people who are listening in, my co-panelists, the organizers, everyone. So Hughes, as you all possibly know, we are the world's largest satellite broadband provider. And in India, we started our operations in 1995. I joined the company in 1994. I was one of the founding members of Hughes since then. So we've had a very exciting journey since then. We were the first one to start a satellite communication service in India at that point of time. We were the first ones to bring in one of the foreign players, SES, to India, for offering capacity. We started providing services using them, their services, their satellites. The new bands, satellite bands, we've introduced a couple of bands. We were the first ones to again provide services using that. And today we are probably the first people to also provide services using high throughput satellites, even though it's the rest of the world, we've done this probably, for the last 20 years, but in India, it's a new beginning. So we are the first ones to bring that service. It's already live. And we will also be the first one to bring the LEO service into India. Some of you might have read that we have recently signed an exclusive agreement with OneWeb to use their capacity to provide services in this country. So this is where we are. So we've navigated through quite a bit of policy and other issues in the past. I personally been on the policy advocacy side, even though I'm an engineer, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been pretty much on this space. I've been working for almost the last 2 decades in this space. So we clearly understand the pain points of trying to establish a business in India and what it takes to make it successful. Some of it, we'll definitely talk about it in the later when Susmita, brings those points across. So that's about it. Over to you, Susmita.
Thanks, Krishna. Clearly, everyone in this panel wears multiple hats. I mean, Krishna, you are the Chief Technology Officer and the Chief Regulatory Officer. That's incredible. So over to you, Lakshmi. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, greetings. This is Lakshmi. I head the missiles and aerospace business at an Indian multinational called Larsen & Toubro. Many of you might know it as L&T. This has been almost about 8 decades that Larsen & Toubro has been the builder to the nation and also operating in all core sectors, strategic sectors, and space is certainly one. And L&T has been associated with ISRO right from its very first mission and practically in every of its mission and every of its endeavor. I myself have been part of the space sector for last almost 20 years as part of Larsen & Toubro. Over the last few years, yes, the opening up of the space sector and the way that this from a completely government-controlled, owned, built, operated model to a liberalization is something not so easy to happen, and that too in a strategic sector like space. And it certainly involves enormous amount of engagement, right from government levels, agencies, policymakers, operators, actors. So therefore, I think this is a process which is what I call as work in progress, WIP. And I think with every day passing, it's taking great shape. And I'm quite confident that pretty shortly we would be seeing a very well-documented policy for the country. Looking forward to this conversation. Great to know, great panelists. And I'm sure there are amazing audience out there. And we're glad to hear out their questions and, if possible, respond to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Lakshmi. So with that, let's get the ball rolling. I've divided our discussion broadly into 3 different rounds. So in the first round, we'll be discussing the state of the industry. Lakshmi, I would like to start with you and sort of go backwards. Tell us a bit about L&T's role thus far and future plans that L&T has in the space transportation sector and the other sectors that you guys are involved in.
Yeah, as I said, Larsen & Toubro is an Indian multinational, and it's almost over 8 decades that it's into various EPC projects, technology, high-tech manufacturing, and services. L&T operates over 50 different countries and has a very strong customer-focused approach, and obviously constantly on a quest for top-class quality that has led L&T to be in some leadership positions in many sectors. Specifically in India, we are engaged in all the core sectors, very high impact sectors for the economy, and have kind of integrated our capabilities cross the entire spectrum and what we call from design to delivery. L&T has, as I said, been a partner to ISRO right from its very first mission. And we have been, with every mission, enhancing our role, our participation, and our contribution to the sector. If I were to kind of broadly segment the whole of space sector into downstream, midstream, and upstream, and downstream being the areas where a lot of R&D happens, and the launch vehicles and the satellite realization, L&T has been tier 1 to ISRO. Every launch vehicle and every satellite of India have had some of the other subsystems or systems realized from within Larsen & Toubro. I would just quickly touch upon the other segments, like the mid segments is where the ground stations, and that's where we operate at an EPC level. We have established complete GSAT stations, ground stations, SATCOM infrastructures on turnkey basis. And there are L&T group companies like L&T Infotech, L&T LTI, and Mindtrees, which I'm sure would be very keen to engage further into the downstream sectors which are opening up, especially in the smart cities and other kinds of things. And we certainly look at space as an economic frontier. And we do understand that such a strategic sector and opening up to the private sector, we have seen defense, we have seen nuclear, we have seen other sectors which have opened. It takes its own time. And I'm sure with the learning from the opening of further sectors, the space sector would be that much quicker, faster, and more accurate.
Thank you. Thank you, Lakshmesh. And I think with that, let's look at the downstream sector a bit. So Sanjay, over to you. Can you give us a quick sketch of the geospatial business landscape in India?
Thanks, Susmita, and hello to our panelists once again. Susmita, you talked about that the space economy is about $420 billion or something like that. And let me start from there that the geospatial industry globally, market size, I'm not talking of the economy, is about $450 billion as on 2021. And out of that $450 billion, almost 60% of that is powered by the space, especially from the GNSS and Earth observation capabilities, and primarily from the GNSS capabilities. So almost, I would say 60% space. Out of that 60% was 40% is, or 45% is GNSS capabilities. Earth observation is picking up as a big market. So that's what is the context of geospatial industry, where on the one side, it is dependent a lot on the space capabilities, but on the other side, it is the geospatial industry, which is an instrument of realizing the actual impact and benefits of the space capabilities to the people. So this is the kind of interface between a space and the people, which has to go through the geospatial industry per se. Well, geospatial industry has primarily been very, very commercial right from the beginning. It's, of course, government has been biggest customer, but it has not been like dependent totally on the government from the industry point of view. And that's how it is very much commercial, and it has penetrated its applications across every walk of our life. Let me give you what happens. Like there are 4 technologies which we consider as part of geospatial technology. One is acquisition. So you talk about any kind of acquisition, like you say Earth observation is a form of acquisition of data. So as UAVs, so as aerial platforms or the ground sensors. Then you're talking of the whole range of positioning infrastructure. Again, GNSS comes as a part of positioning infrastructure, but there are terrestrial positioning infrastructure technologies which are very much being used everywhere. And that's where the industry started from. And the third is the LiDAR and scanning technologies. And fourth is the GIS and analytics technology. These are the 4 technologies which actually form a geospatial industry. And they has been very much integrated with primarily all the IT, like be it cloud, AI, ML. All these IT technologies have actually powered geospatial integration in the workflows, primarily into 4 or 5 sectors, I would say. Architecture, engineering, and construction, which is very high precision industry. Then you look at all the business intelligence platform, which is location-based analytics, which we all use every day. And then you go to the defense and intelligence, and then you go to HD and autonomy. So these are the major, that's how you can categorize those applications. So geospatial industry is, I would say, an interface between space and the people. Now looking at context of India. So when I talked about almost $450 billion market, and I know unfortunately, India is about, say, 1.5 billion or $2 billion market only in India in terms of geospatial. But if you look at the geospatial economy of India, it's about $6 billion right now. And we have been exporting around almost 1.7 to $1.9 billion of geospatial services annually. And in addition to this, when I also say use the word economy, I also want to say that the government is spent on the geospatial mapping is also a part of the economy. And you'll be surprised that almost 90% of the government spend into various institutions, including NRSC or Survey of India, Forestry Survey of India, Geological Survey of India, All India Land Use Survey. All these institutions where we're spending almost 13,000 crores. You may just confuse sometimes the 30,000 crores is also the space budget, but that's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm taking only 3,000 to 4,000 crores out of that space budget for the geospatial spend. So almost 90% of that is into salaries and establishment. And only 10% of that is kind of in the market. So that's the kind of distinction one has to make, that that's not a part of the market, but that's part of the economy, yes. So that's where the geospatial industry fits into, but it's growing very fast. It's growing almost 18 to 19% now. And let me bring the policy impact. So you all know that geospatial policy guidelines came up in last February. And as I said, as of 2021, it is 38,000 crore economy. By 2025, it was going to be about 52,000 crores. But the impact of policy has made it to grow to almost 65,000 crores by 2025. That is the kind of geospatial economy growth in India which we are seeing. And this is based on very rigorous mapping and understanding and interactions and projections of the companies and their investments in this direction. But what I'm going to say even further is what is needed is the substantial industrial strategy. Because this industry has been under shackles or has been controlled or has been, not been given enough attention. So suddenly the policy reforms will not only lead us to leverage this. So we have done a study which talks about that if an industrial strategy comes in place, then it would be almost 82,000 crores by 2025. But I want to just give one more last point is that let's not look at just 50,000 to 80,000 crores kind of comparison of 30,000 crores or additional revenue. Let's look at that, what is going to be the impact. The government of India is investing almost 100 to 150 to $200 billion across infrastructure, water, health, sanitation, housing, agriculture. All these billion to billion dollar projects need information. In the information it is the information which can make these projects more productive, more efficient, more transparent, and more effective in implementation. The impact of this industrial strategy and policy reforms will actually empower those sectors. Instead of completing a highway in 3 years, you'll be able to complete that highway in 2 years because you'll not waste 1 year in surveying that highway. That kind of benefit, which will be augmented by GNSS capabilities or terrestrial infrastructure capabilities or the power of AI and machine learning for using that knowledge. This is the kind of proposition which the government should look at, and why they should look at making as Ranjana said in the opening remarks, clear policies which can be converted into laws. There should not be any ambiguity, because you are talking of an industry which is going to be lakhs of crores. Then you would need IPR, you would need kind of responsibility, you need liabilities, because you're information. So authenticity of the decision and the whole process of the value chain in terms of law is going to be very, very important. Thank you.
I think with that, I'll come to you, Ranjana. So could you give us a brief overview of the various space policy drafts that the Department of Space has put out since 2017, and also share some of your views on IN-SPACe, this new nodal interface that the government has set up or is trying to set up?
So Shushmita, you were talking of a broad review starting 2017. I imagine that 2017, you're referring to the draft Space Activities Bill.
That's right. That's right.
Now, first and foremost, that Space Activities Bill was before the reforms were announced.
Yes, indeed.
At the relevant point in time, there was absolutely nothing suggesting that there were going to be any kind of space reforms. However, what was happening is that the new space, the sui generis new space companies had emerged, and the first generation that you yourself, Shushmita, represent, were very vocal and fearless in your advocacy of your presence.
Right.
And this is the unique thing that I see about you and NP and everybody who's your first generation new space. And there was also advocacy that led to having questions being asked in Parliament. And so there were young MPs who had just got elected, and they would ask these questions about what are you doing about these companies, and when are we going to have a space law? I'll have to plead guilty on the subject of space law because in 2005, the first time that I made a presentation at an international conference here in Bangalore, I was told, actually, it was because the UN, the USA, was promoting countries that didn't already have a space law to have a space law. And it was called Bringing Benefits to the Asia-Pacific Region of Space. And I was at the relevant point in time just finishing at McGill, and Ram Chaku told me that, why, right, you're going back to India, now you do this presentation. So I had no baggage. My husband being in government notwithstanding, I simply did not carry any baggage about the space establishment. And so I had presented a very logical, aisa hona chahiye, this, that, and the other, whatever. So in any event, that is where, because the mandate was that countries should have space law if they are into space activity, that was my presentation. Ultimately, there were these questions that were asked. And I believe, and subject to correction by those who have the authentic knowledge on it, it was in response to that they said, all right, fine, so actually we're getting a space policy act together without a comprehensive space policy and without having thought through. The first draft, as everybody knows, had everything to do with frightening people to even think about it, forget about getting into it, and contemplated ground segment manufacturers to also be under scrutiny. And I recall saying that if you're going to create an artificial classification between existing suppliers of goods and services to the Department of Space, to the space program, and this new lot, all of them are also under Companies Act, well, it'll get challenged in court because you don't have a rational or intelligible differentiator that can distinguish between these two. Anyway, short point is that it was amended, and now there is the amended version. Again, as I said before, unnecessary expansion, if only to say that, yes, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to be mean, but sometimes it seems as if to say that I am the state and I will write what I wish to write. Well, of course you can. Of course you can. But if you want people to operate in space, for example, it says you will have liability for damage caused in space to so on and so forth, and environment. Now, my question here is, firstly, the international law doesn't speak about the environment. Why? Who exactly is going to assess the damage to environment, and who is going to be lodging that claim? And second of all, someone who's drafting would have to stop and say, why is it that environment is not included? After all, there's so much debris, it's causing grief, everyone says that is the case. But the reason for that is that, look, everything that is man-made is an assault on space environment. Why isn't it there? For the reason that the agreement between the two superpowers was that so long as we do not do anything which is construed to be aggressive, it means that you're doing peaceful use. The debate was, what is peaceful use, aggressive or military? Neither of the two. You know that space has been birthed because of military technologies, and it continues to be military. And so therefore, all these ASAT tests that are happening, they're not, they're peaceful use. They're not aggressive. Every country says that, it's just a scientific experiment. It introduces debris. Everyone knows it introduces debris. And that is the reason why even Article 4 only says you cannot put WMDs and nuclear weapons. It does not talk about anything from Earth upwards, a kinetic or a conventional weapon. There is space is about geopolitics. That's how agreements are made. So therefore, when you have a draft activities bill, which says an environment, I have to ask myself, why? If we actually mean to have private sector, as was being said earlier, there is a lot of money that is invested on the basis of policy and law. Sanjay was telling us. Now, if you don't have clarity or are not devoted to drafting meticulously and with clarity, you're doing yourself and the Indian industry disservice. So
Ranjana,
so let us discount so listen to me.
Yeah.
Let us discount 2017. Let's put that away. Let's not talk about it any further. And you have these policies that have been issued after the announcement. And all of them, I think, I don't know whether they are, but anyway, you have now got this Indian space policy, which is just recently. So let's not even discuss those previous policies because actually you now have the 2021 version. It's a vast improvement without any doubt. But again, it needs meticulous care if this indeed will be the template. And where I spoke about IN-SPACe, when you say that IN-SPACe will be responsible for authorization. So authorization of what? If you're talking of space activity, that authorization, that word is used in the Outer Space Treaty, and it means very many things. So right now, where there is just the IN-SPACe, it is under the administrative control of Department of Space. Dr. Goenka is heading it. Are you saying, therefore, that he will be the licensor? I mean, IN-SPACe will be the one who will sign the license? DOT, for example, and Krishna knows this well, is the licensor for satellite communication technology services downstream. They are the ones who give service license. They are authorized under the allocation of business rules to do that. So there are many disconnects, and that is the problem for me.
Yeah, so let me contextualize what Ranjana is saying here for those of you who are new to the world of space and space policy, especially in the Indian context. So one of the things that Ranjana brought up is that the very first Space Activities Bill of 2017, the way it had been written, it almost overtly was putting out warnings to penalize the private companies if they were found guilty of littering in space, which if she was also trying to put it in the context of international treaties, because you can't put out things in an act which is, it doesn't work that way. It's and for those of you who are not familiar with space debris, I should also tell you that as of today, we have more than 300 million man-made debris objects orbiting in space, which includes dead satellites, last stages of spent rocket parts, discarded solar panels, and fragments from ASAT or anti-satellite tests. So I think what Ranjana was telling us is how the first draft, the first act of 2017 was articulated, it was definitely not in favor of private participation. And we've come a long way since then. The latest space policy that came out recently, which is currently being reviewed by experts such as Ranjana and industry experts that we have on the panel, it has made really a leap, if you ask us, from being from looking at the private industry as sort of a competitor, as someone that needs to be wary of what it's doing, to a partner, a co-developer, a partner in the future space economy. So I think it's good to see that the government has actually made that transition, which we all welcome. A couple of other things that Ranjana mentioned, she was referring to the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, and she was also referring to the United Nations, USA, which is Outer Space Affairs Office in Vienna, which is a UN body which also convenes what is called the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, or COPUS, where India, as with other countries, is represented, and decisions are made on international treaties and laws. I think with that, I'll hand it over to Krishna. Krishna, tell us a bit about how the satellite broadband industry has changed in recent years, and what kind of owner economics makes sense to be able to play in this evolving new marketplace.
Yeah, so as I said, the industry evolved. It began in the year 1995. Those were the days when the fiberization was very poor. So satellite was the best media choice available, and probably at that time, to connect between two locations, believe me, it was the cheapest media option available at a point of time. That's before the government decided to privatize the telecom sector. So definitely that was a booming year for the satellite players at that point of time, and of course the terrestrial players, as everyone would imagine, really caught up. So today, fast forward today, where we are in a situation where traditionally satellite has served the enterprise markets, the B2B markets, and those markets have saturated, and they have saturated for many reasons. One, primarily because as enterprises want low latency connectivity. I think latency has been the biggest, in fact, the biggest killer of satellite, which is what hopefully the LEOs will address. We'll come to that a little later. But most of the enterprise users or the B2B users want to access different applications that need ultra low latency. And that's been the real problem with satellite all throughout. And as a result, most of the enterprises today, apart from certain thin route applications like your ATM, bank ATMs, or gas stations, and those applications still work. But all the thick users, who use ERP and other business applications, they've all moved out to terrestrial technologies. And terrestrial is also, the rollout of terrestrial has caught up quite a bit. So I think the biggest change what's happening in the industry today is the industry is, and this is true in most parts of the world, that the satellite industry is rightly beginning to address the consumers who are living in areas which are outside the fiber limits, or where it doesn't make economic sense to put fiber. Somebody put out a chart. It said that to connect the last 10 to 15% of the population is going to be 10 to 20 times more expensive, connecting it via terrestrial means, and that's where satellite bridges that gap, and that's what satellite is expected to do. Now, having said that, this is clearly has been very successful in certain markets. Like the US, even though that's the most fiberized market today, but satellite has played a big role today. All the big numbers come from the US. But of course, in countries like India, where the population, there's a drastic decline of affordability as you go outside about possibly 200 top cities in the country. So when that happens, so just a consumer, reaching the consumer, is you have to have the lowest cost to reach the consumer. lowest cost, both in terms of terminal cost and in terms of the usage what a consumer would pay. So possibly many approaches will be taken, and that's what companies are doing today. One is go through what's called Wi-Fi hotspots or community Wi-Fi, where you for a community you install a satellite broadband apparatus, and you distribute it through Wi-Fi means to the nearby community. Sell vouchers, scratch cards, which people can use to buy internet, and that's made a significant difference in some of the developing markets. Other significant area is your backhaul to cellular networks, because cellular networks, as they're trying to reach farther and farther locations, it's not economically viable to reach those farther markets. And at the same time, there are harder to reach difficult terrain areas, which would need a reliable backhaul mechanism which satellite can rightly address. The third interesting market is the mobility market, which is when people want to access the internet, sitting in an aircraft, sitting in a ship, sitting in a yacht. So these are all natural, I would say, natural fitments for satellite. That's a third real market. And the new emerging market is again the IoT market, where there are devices which need to be connected, which are again out in the wild. So say monitoring an oil pipeline, taking electric meter readings. These are all applications which could be very well done by satellite, because satellite you don't need a real ground infrastructure to reach those hard to reach locations. But all of this is going to need extremely low cost, satellite capacity, and also the CPE needs to be the lowest cost. So I feel that's the area where the growth is really going to come from, and that's where I think the erstwhile chairman of ISRO rightly put it, that India has only 50% of the capacity that it needs. And a lot of capacity has to come from foreign providers, at least in the short term. So I feel, I think I've always been saying that, from a policy perspective, we have to have some short-term goal in mind, some medium-term goal in mind, and some long-term goal in mind. And it's a no-brainer. The long-term goal is self-sustenance. Everybody understands that, or self-reliance. Everybody understands that, but the self-reliance is not going to happen tomorrow. I think, so we need to have a strategy for short-term and medium-term as well. And that's what, is today the state of the industry. The industry is expecting that low-cost capacity. Keep in mind that, today in India, the data usage or the cost of data, what our dear mobile friends, mobile MNOs in India are offering is probably the lowest in the world. It's 13 cents per MB of data download. In satellite, the cheapest data download that's available is probably $2.6 MB. So that is a gap. I mean, that's a huge gap. So that so a lot has to be done by the industry in bringing the latest technologies to India, and again the policy has to enable it. So both have to happen hand in hand. And that's what we are all hoping for.
I think with that, what I'll do is, Ranjana, would you want to sort of now, I'll open it up to the panelists to sort of have a discussion, a free-flowing discussion. So Ranjana, would you want to start, and maybe you have questions regarding the new policy in the context of SATCOM or space transportation or geospatial?
Yes, Krishna, I would like to actually ask you if you can say something about the LEO and the current regulatory framework that is underway with TRAI and so on. Would you weigh in on that, please, and let us know exactly how that is shaping up and what you would like to see?
Yeah, I would say that that's a very nascent area. I think not just for us as a country, but all across the globe. When I look at various policies that are coming out and various consultations, public consultations that are happening, it's relatively a nascent area. again, what we are seeing is, I mean, all of us take, examples of some of these mega constellations that have been announced, so 3 or 4 of them who are going to provide or flood the entire market with so much of capacity. But this is going to be a huge challenge, both in terms of regulations, for in many reasons. One, it's a new technology. Nobody understands how this works, how it is to be regulated. Also, now it is creating a kind of a divide within the satellite industry as well. That's what I would call it. So there is, on one side, you have this GSO based, satellite operators. The other side, you have this mega constellation operators. So there are, the GSO operators need some protection because they have invested into this market. They have their assets in the sky. So they should not face any threat in terms of interference or in terms of collision risks, etc., from the the non-GSO, the LEO players. And at the same time, the LEO players argue that so they are fresh entrants in the market. So it shouldn't be an old boys club where the GSO guys have got all the rights, in terms of spectrum, in terms of orbital resources, and the NGSOs are left with nothing. So I think both have their merits, but I think so. DOT is currently, definitely there are various proposals. I think probably the good part is both the Telegraph Act and the licensing structure is neutral to whether you operate a GSO or a non-GSO, constellation. So that's a good part. At least fundamentally, the Telegraph Act or the licensing structure doesn't have to change. But a lot of new specifications, new guidelines, processes have to be evolved. For example, in the GSO world, the inter-satellite coordination with ITU is all well defined, but a lot of it is not so well defined on the NGSO side. So I think the government is working today. We see a lot of such dialogues that are happening. So hopefully, I think by the time the policy is in place, by the time I think the licensing aspects of the licensing will also be clear as to how one has to go about regulating.
And tell me, Krishna, as a follow-up, is there any discussion at all amongst the LEO operators or hopeful LEO operators about any international regulation? The COPUS, as Sushmita was saying, is the forum where it's part of the UN, and therefore consensus is required for the purpose of making international law on the business of space traffic management and collision avoidance. Is there any sense in the industry per se to say that we have to encourage our governments to sit down and talk and arrive at a consensus so all of us can coexist?
Yeah, definitely.
Krishna, if I may interject, can you please explain just briefly what the LEO constellation means? And I mean, there are MEO constellations also coming up, so that the audience understands the difference between the heavy tonnage COMSATs in geostationary orbit versus the constellations in low Earth orbit.
Yeah, so the low Earth orbit is, you can go as low as about 345 or 350 kilometers from the Earth and all the way up to possibly 2,000 kilometers. And the MEO orbit is typically in the range of about 8 to 10,000 kilometers. And, of course, the GSO orbit is, 36,000 kilometers. The MEO orbit is an equatorial orbit. Whereas the LEO orbit is, could be, polar. It has a certain level of inclination. It could be polar. It could be so. It could be many different shells where the inclination from the Earth, from the equator and the altitude is defined. But you could have multiple planes of orbit. That's how typically a LEO orbit is structured. But that said, it makes a significant difference on the latency. If you remember, the latency is increasingly becoming important in communication, and so one would ask. I mean, many people have asked this question that why is latency so important? In a data traffic, and so this is a question that I often get. So one is, I mean, of course, we are having this webinar today. So just imagine if there's a huge latency and every time you ask a question or anybody asks a question and there's a huge, my response comes about, a couple of seconds later, how would it look? So that's one aspect to it. Second is, I think the LEOs are becoming increasingly important for the younger generation, the millennials, and possibly even at a much younger age, people get onto the internet today. So today, I'm sure all of you have faced this with your children or somebody in the family. I mean, children would, or even adults to an extent, get to gaming pretty much on the internet today. It's all not isolated gaming, it's all networked gaming that people are used to. So which again, that's a place where the latency makes a significant difference. Also importantly, that if you're doing a cellular call where there is a satellite backhaul, you don't want the cellular call to sound any different than a normal cellular call which is backhauled by a terrestrial microwave or fiber. So that's one other aspect.
So Krishna, can I now just steer you towards the question that Ranjana had asked regarding traffic management and the LEO constellations?
Yeah, I was just coming to that. Yeah. So again, I mean, I'm not going to name companies, but there are companies which are trying to put together a framework to make sure there is better management, better debris management, better collision management. But there are certain rogue companies as well, rogue and not in the sense of any other means, but who feel that these policies and these things are going to be very restrictive for their business, so they don't want to adhere to such things. And but that's I think the biggest concern of the regulators today. I think it's a very interesting question from that perspective. The biggest concern of regulators today is twofold. One is interference management, because if you have satellites flying all over, so definitely it's going to cause interference. So from a radio frequency perspective, that's a big concern. And second is the collision and the debris management is definitely a big concern. So definitely, I don't think the regulators can just do it alone. But I think these companies which are now launching these mega constellations, keeping their competitiveness aside, have to come together in a responsible way and address this issue. And this is very, very important. Otherwise, this whole bubble that's building up will just break down.
So I'd like to add a couple of sentences here so that the audience can understand. So the LEO constellations, for example, you've heard of Elon Musk's Starlink constellation. There is the OneWeb constellation, and there are many such constellations now in orbit, and some of them are in the making. Most of them, the satellites, because they're flying in low Earth orbit, their lifespans are short. So they die in about, say, 2.5 years. And that adds to the debris population in low Earth orbit, just to contextualize what's being discussed here. And I think with that, I'd like to ask Lakshmi. So Lakshmi, for the longest time, we in India have been looking forward to ISRO outsourcing routine assembly operations, whether it's rocket assembly or satellite manufacturing and assembly, to the private industry. So do you think the new policy draft will allow a company like L&T, for example, to come together in a consortium format with other companies and take on, say, manufacturing, assembly, and operations of the PSLV rocket, as an example? So can you tell us how the new policy might or might not facilitate outsourcing of routine satellite and rocket assembly to the private industry?
Okay, so let me just build a little context here. Like any other country, the Indian space has also been operating on what I call as DBOO model. That means develop, build, own, and operate and provide services. All of that has been done by the state or by the government through ISRO. Every other spacefaring nation at some point of time have been doing this until they took on the liberalization path. So today India is thinking of moving out of this DBOO to deregulate, decentralize, liberalize, privatize, and then globalize, like in a structured manner. So you're absolutely right. Till now, because it was on the DBO model, ISRO was the designer, builder, system integrator, and therefore the role of the industry was at a super tier 1 level and tier 2 and tier 3 kind of an establishment. That's how the ecosystem was built. With the opening up of this liberalization, wherein which it allows now entities to get into end-to-end activities in space. So certainly it opens up, you can build your own launch vehicles, you can launch it. Of course, it has to go through all the regulated processes. But yeah, certainly this is a good welcome change. And we do see as not just L&T, but as an entire space industry of how we can leverage on our roles which we played as tier 1s and tier 2s and tier 3s to ISRO. How do we leverage with that? Number two, how do we leverage our own interdependencies within these different organizations and take on the role of converting the space sector into not just an R&D establishment, R&D sector, but more into an economic sector. So we do look at this in a very positive way.
Thank you. Thanks, Lakshmi. And I think, Ranjana, can I ask you a little bit about the 5G spectrum landscape? I mean, where are we with that? And what do you think, how do you think the new policy will facilitate the business on that front? What are the new developments on that front?
Well, you know, Shushmita, the Department of Telecommunications in 2018 had already got a new law in place, a policy in place, in preparation for this 5G and the final outcomes of the World Radio Regulations, which happened at the end of 2019. So already they were talking of a digital communications policy. And so mentally, they had already shifted gear. As Krishna was also talking about, the TRAI has put out a lot of papers for consultation. And I will have to say that over the 20 years that satellite telecommunications has been around, and I have actually been part of some of those litigations, it was a very difficult birthing, if you like. There was DOT, and then they said, well, if we want to, if we have a challenge and we don't agree with DOT, who should we go and ask? You can't be the licensor and the regulator. And then that came about TRAI. Then what should I do if they give an order and I wish to challenge it? Obviously the same. Then TDSAT, and finally. So that entire structure has come about through litigation. The licensing, which used to be an in advance payment, ended up becoming a revenue sharing model, et cetera, et cetera. So they have got an institutional mechanism and a manner in which they're able to get these regulations together. Mm-hmm. And they're able to have deep consultations, and they actually have a lot of interaction. Important point is that, of course, how will 5G be rolled out? Let's see how the auctions happen. Let's see what response there is. Who are the ones who will dominate the market? There's always those interplays, as we very well know and we read about. So it's very difficult to predict, but yes, 5G is going to be a very big thing, for sure.
I think since we are running out of time, I would like to ask, I mean, I can't have the rapid fire round as planned. So there's one question that I want all the panelists to respond in under 30 seconds. So what do you think is the most important thing the government and Department of Space need to do if India has to be transformed into a developed space economy by, say, 2030? Ranjana, just a quick 30-second answer.
I think what the government needs to do is to have absolute clarity that it wants to do this, and then put out documents because it wants to do this, not because there's a demand from this constituency or that constituency, or play to the gallery. And Krishna? There must be clarity and precision in whatever they draft.
Okay, so I guess the takeaways here are clarity and precision. Krishna, 30-second answer.
Yeah, again, I'm saying this not as a huge person, as an Indian citizen. Two things that comes to my mind. One is definitely this policy has been delayed and it needs to come out very fast. That will set the pitch. Actually three. Second one is, since 2000, this is the second time we are going through a revision. I think, it's a very, very fast evolving area. We need to have, more frequent revisions because things are changing quite a bit. Third, another area which has been very close to my heart is the protection of IPR. I think today a lot of companies that are working are more working as in a glorified way as contract people for many of the foreign companies who develop certain parts of things here. But I don't think we are holding any IPR to say. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's another area which we need to work to protect that IPR. Whatever we do, whether we do through ISRO. And ISRO supports the industry or the industry does on their own, I think a lot of this needs to be protected because a lot of money is being spent, a lot of time and effort by a lot of these startups are being spent. I think a lot of that needs to be protected.
Yeah, Krishna, absolutely. I think all of us in the space industry are very keen on seeing very clear IPR regimes where the private industry gets to benefit, not just contribute to the Indian space program. And I think you're also talking about speed. We really need to accelerate things on the home front.
Absolutely.
What about you, Sanjay? 30-second take on what is the most important thing the government needs to do to help us become a developed space economy?
Three things I would like to say. First of all, the government should actually implement the principles of the policy to the core and its spirit. I would like to emphasize on that a lot of policies don't get implemented to the spirits and value. So they should actually implement that as soon as possible. There is enough time we have spent in deliberating on this for the last 3, 4, 5 years. Second is the government should look at creating open data strategy. It is again there, but then it is not in practice. We should actually create open data strategy, and all the past constellation and all the information of the past 30 years should be made public for this, and that can be used for sustainable development. Third is, I think the government should look at providing level playing field to the private sector, and that level playing field will only come if there's an industrial strategy behind it. As somebody said that we need to be self-reliant. Yes, we all need to be self-reliant. That's not going to happen overnight. It needs hand-holding, nurturing, and trust of the government with a kind of geospace fund. Our companies should get some kind of special provisions for, in this sector. So industrial strategy is very important. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sanjay. So your takeaway from your response would be, again, speed, industrial strategy, and open data policy. I think for the open data policy, Sanjay, in my view, it's very important for the government, especially the bureaucrats and the decision makers in Delhi, to understand the economics of open data.
Exactly.
Thank you. And over to you, Lakshmi, 30-second response. What do you think the government needs to do if we have to become a developed space economy?
I think I would pitch it at what I call as transition management. When you change the industry, which is completely state and government driven, and you want to bring it to liberalized, private driven, this cannot happen one switch off and one switch on. And there will be certain amount of legacy, certain amount of, what we call as bringing down something and taking up. So I think this transition management is essential. So many of you have mentioned about the speed. Speed is about how do we bring the new, and transition is about how do we sustain the present. Otherwise, the entire ecosystem will be chaotic.
Brilliant. Okay, that's beautifully articulated. So I think the broad takeaways then are the government needs to pay attention to IPR, intellectual property, and find ways to have private industry co-develop, co-create, and own IP, not just contribute to the program. Speed, of course, but with speed, this transition management thing that Lakshmi just discussed is extremely important, so that we hold on to the strengths we already have as a nation, as a spacefaring nation, while transitioning to new economies around space, where we leverage space assets. Clarity and precision, I think that's very, very important as well, because if you look at the earlier drafts of our space policy, most of them were eminently rewritable. I'm borrowing words from Ranjana from an earlier conversation. And I think this whole idea of an open data policy is something India should embrace, because we often come up against speed breakers like the word security, protocol, but the economics around open data, as you can see with open constellations, you know, with from Europe, from the United States, is immense, and we need to embrace that. And with that, I think I'll wrap up today's panel. I did go through the questions in the question and answer box. Most of them were not related to policy. There was a question from Mr. Ram, where he's asking Ranjana to comment on what kind of space policy is there, internationally speaking, for debris regulation, debris mitigation. Is there anything yet, or what exists is outdated? And with that, we will close the session. Ranjana, can you please respond to that?
Well, yes, there are, there's an interagency debris mitigation agency, which is a derivative of the UN COPUS. And they have come up with voluntary guidelines, which are best practices, really, on how debris can be mitigated and what should be done. And as we speak, there is technology development on the subject of how debris can be scavenged, but there are many issues, including IPR, of course. This is a very complex subject of how is it that we can clean debris, physically. But there are only voluntary guidelines for obvious reasons. Nobody wants to be limited and bound. We'll recognize that after 1979, there has been no consensus on an international treaty. But one point on debris, open data, Sanjay, I would actually add to what you said and recommend that institutionally, the approach of access denial, which is how we approach data, should be converted to an institutional approach of open data, access to data. And whatever needs to be kept secure, keep it secure, open the rest. That is how most advanced countries are operating.
Yeah, we are in a data economy age. We need to look at
very seriously
data as an economic asset.
Thank you. I think with that note, we will wrap up. Thank you very much, Ranjana, Sanjay, Krishna, Lakshmi, and a big shout out to Bangalore International Center for co-hosting this with us. We hope to have more such panels in the future now that our space economy is liberalizing. Thanks a lot, everyone, and good night.